Your perception of effort isn't a true measure of how much energy is left in your body or how many twitches are left in your muscles. It's a measure of how close your brain thinks you are to the danger zone. Those among our ancestors who were willing to just run to their true physical limits didn't pass on their genes because they kept keeling over and dying. Fatigue is an emotion that makes you want to stop. It's your perception of effort that matters. It feels hard, and that's a very changeable thing.
Alex Hutchinson is a physicist turned journalist and one of the world's leading thinkers on the science of endurance. He's the author of Endure, a cult classic that rewired how athletes, coaches, and neuroscientists think about fatigue. Not as a failure of the physical body, but as a story the brain tells to protect us from ourselves. He's run sub-3 marathons, sat in brain-zapping chairs at the Red Bull HQ, and chased down the boundaries of human potential in everything from ultramarathons to freediving blackouts. Subscribe if you want to find out why your brain is lying to you and how to politely ignore it while sprinting into the abyss.
You take up running for the first time and you go for a jog, and your brain has all these predictions, and it's never been this far out of whack, and you're nowhere near your physical limits, but you're just not used to being that far out of breath, or that the oxygen levels that low in your blood or whatever, and so you perceive that you're close to your limits, and as time goes on, you're able to update those predictions of like, oh no wait, last time I was in this situation, I stopped, but then I felt fine like 5 seconds later, and I clearly wasn't about to die after all. It's not surprising when someone doesn't squeeze everything out of their physical capacity. To me, what's surprising, what's a miracle, is when someone does come close to it's like the default is that we all leave a ton in the tank. We're not able to squeeze everything out of ourselves. And so it takes something special, either a great talent, which some runners have, or circumstances, or learning to do it to come closer to that.
Alex Hutchinson, as the foremost expert on endurance, in your view, what is the most impressive feat of endurance that you've ever read about?
Okay, first of all, I'll say I am definitely not the foremost expert on endurance, but as a guy who loves endurance and lives it and thinks about it a lot. Okay, the greatest feat of it. Oh man, Evan, that's a that's a killer question to start with.
I got to start with a big question.
Yeah, okay, let me answer it in a few different ways. The one that speaks to me as like the one that has was lodged in my brain and kind of inspired me is actually the 4-minute mile, the first
Right.
4-minute mile. Not because it's the hardest thing anyone ever did, but because it kind of encapsulates our fascination with the ability to push beyond what we thought was physically capable,
Right.
and because it's something that has endured for so long, and also because it's just 4 minutes long. So I think there's sometimes, like, when you ask that question, the first thing I'm thinking of is like, well, it's got to be like, a 100-hour continuous slog, and those are brutal in its own ways. But to me, I'm gonna stick with the 4-minute mile because it's a demonstration that absolutely insane feats of endurance can be packed into a relatively short period of time. It's not just about like extended suffering.
Right. We have got to go to Faith Kipyegon's attempt at the 4-minute mile then. What are your thoughts on that whole race? Kind of break down everything that went on there.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, the truth is that my answer to your question probably is influenced by the fact that I was in Paris a couple of weeks ago covering Faith Kipyegon's attempt to run a 4-minute mile. Look, that's
a whole. She would do it first off.
No, I didn't. I mean, her world record was 4:07 going into it, and 7 seconds is an eternity. But the thing is, it's like a company like Nike doesn't spend whatever it spent. It's definitely in the millions of dollars to humiliate themselves, right? Like they're not stupid. So then the question was, well, what tricks did they have up their sleeve? So I didn't think she would do it, but I certainly wasn't willing to rule it out, because you never know if, they've developed, rocket fueled running shorts or whatever. Like, you just don't know, because they weren't promising to adhere to any particular rules. So you didn't know what and as it turned out, the race they put on was relatively pure, in the sense that the only real deviation from the usual rules was that they had male pacemakers. And so if I'd known that was going to be the conditions of the race, then I would have put a few extra dollars on her not doing it. But she went through 1,200 meters, so almost 3/4 of the race in 3:01. Which to me, that was the most impressive part of the performance. It's like,
Right.
because it's one thing to say, oh, well, anyone can go through, like, that's only 3/4 of the race. But knowing that she still had a lap to go, and that she couldn't just jog that lap in, it's very hard to trick you. And I say this from experience of, like, it's very hard to run as if you don't have to run that last part of the race. Your mind always knows how much longer you're going to have to go. So for her to be able to lay it out there and to go through 3/4 of the race almost on pace, I think is arguably more impressive than just a couple days ago. She set she broke her own world record for 1,500 meters. So she ran 3:48, which is equivalent to about let's say a 4:06 or something like that. I think her going through 3/4 of a mile in 3:01 and then hanging in there for the last lap was more impressive, even if the time wasn't more impressive.
Right. Why did she have so many pacers? That was immediately something when I saw the video that kind of took me aback. Was there like 20 pacers on that track with her? It seemed a bit strange, isn't it? Is that strategic?
Yeah.
Is that...
So look, she had 13 pacers. The goal is to create a moving bubble of air such that the air is moving at the same speed as she is. So in theory, if you have 100 pacers running at exactly the right pace with just a little hole in the middle for her, that's the optimal scenario. The problem is that theory and practice are different in practice. They're the same in theory, yes, but they're different in practice. And as you probably noticed when you watched it, it kind of looked like this chaotic amoeba of runners around her. So they weren't able, to really get the benefits of pacemaking. A lot of the research suggests you need to be like tucked right behind your pacemakers, so that there's no, vortex of air, that's turbulent air that's hitting you or anything like that, or no air at all, ideally hitting you. It didn't look to me like they were tight enough around her. The other thing is there was also a sort of, there was an optics thing where I think Nike did not want to have the first woman's 4-minute mile with her towed along by a pack of exclusively men. So they had 2 female pacemakers in there, 2 of the greatest runners in the world, actually, who were going halfway behind her. Now you might say, like, who cares if they're behind her? How are they helping her? Well, if you look at the aerodynamics, having people behind you helps make sure that the streamlines stay straight, so that the turbulent air doesn't. So it's almost like
interesting,
someone's pushing behind you. So cyclists know this too. Like the fastest place to be is not right at the back of the pace line; it's in the middle of the pace line. So they had 2 female pacemakers in there, who then dropped out halfway, and then other pacemakers had to move up, and so that made it more chaotic too. And so I don't think they actually really nailed the aerodynamics as well as they could have. But yeah, so the result was a race that looked fairly chaotic.
Right. I'm sure you've seen the videos of the speed skaters who are directly behind an actual bubble like that is attached to the back of a car, and they are like literally 100%. I'm surprised Nike didn't come out with something like that, right? Because that seems like the physics engineering solution to this problem.
Yeah, there's some great, like, I don't know if they're I can't remember if there's videos or just stories of like people. There was like a mile in a minute McGee or something like that, like setting cycling records 100 years ago, chasing a train. So they're cycling as fast as they can right behind a train. That's with amazing. A big, so the aerodynamics is real. And like, look, I'm a runner, so not a cyclist, but I know cyclists, and I eventually, like, my father-in-law is a cyclist, so 15 years ago when I was just starting to date my now wife, we went on a cycling trip with him. And so I had a chance to like ride on a real bike in a Peloton and experience what it feels like to get dropped off the back of the Peloton. If you let the wheel go, you let half a wheel open up and then all of a sudden you're pedaling twice as hard and going more slowly.
Right.
So it's not as intuitive for runners to understand that this stuff matters, but it does. And or at least it does to some extent. There's still scientists disagree on like if Nike had nailed the pacing perfectly, how much would that have helped Faith Kipyegon? And
Right.
you get to ask different scientists, you'll get different answers. Some of them will say it's like 7 seconds. Some of them will say it's like a second or 2 seconds or something like that. It's something, but it's exactly how much it is not clear.
Right. When Nike are paying millions for something like this, where are they expecting to get the biggest performance boosts from? You said the shorts, the top. Like where if you were to break it down in terms of even percentages, like what do these tiny little things, how do they add up? How do they break down? The shoes, the air resistance, kind of everything that Nike put into it. And in the sub 2 effort with Eliud Kipchoge as well, sort of where were the efforts made to shave off those seconds?
Yeah. So first of all, Nike's paying millions, and what they're expecting is to sell more shoes in the long run, right? Like,
right,
so
of course.
It's a lot of the money was spent in getting the message out, and I think for breaking 2, Eliud Kipchoge's race, like it was a success. Like they launched their new type of shoe with a real bang, even though Kipchoge didn't initially break 2. They sort of re-established themselves to the extent that they had drifted a little bit away from their roots. They re-established themselves as the sort of innovative force of science. So I think, and that has faded a little bit in the last few years. And so I think what they've tried to do with breaking 4 was again planting the flag and say, anyway, we all understand this. It was in part a marketing exercise, but where was the science supposed to be? So for this one, for breaking 4, for Faith Kipyegon's mile race, basically they had this aerodynamic suit, and we could spend a lot of time talking about all the different things that they tried to do. They're like the air is moving fastest over the knuckles, so they had arm sleeves that extended over the knuckles, and they had little dots that are supposed to create mini vortexes to break up the turbulent air flow. Like they went deep into the science. My analysis would be the suit doesn't matter. Like we're talking a fraction of a second. So the 2 things that are left are shoes and drafting.
Yeah.
Now in breaking 2 with Eliud Kipchoge, the shoes were the big deal. This was 2017. They introduced running shoes with a curved carbon fiber plate and a thick foam midsole. And they were able to show in the lab, it's like, even this first generation of shoes makes runners on average 4% more efficient. That's a huge deal in the marathon.
It's crazy over a marathon, yeah.
And so the drafting is also significant, but at a marathon, it's a slower speed. The slower you go, the less drafting matters. So it's like that debate is still open. It's like Eliud Kipchoge ran a couple minutes faster than the world record, 2.5 minutes faster. How much of that was shoes? How much of that was drafting? For me, I'd say probably like 2/3 shoes, 1/3 drafting, maybe half. But you could definitely find smart people who would say, no, it was all the shoes, or smart people who would say it was mostly the drafting.
Yeah.
For the mile race, it's shoes. It comes down to shoes and drafting. For the mile, they're going faster, so the drafting should matter more in theory. Like the faster you go, the more significant air resistance is. And conversely, the shoes, there's less to gain because super shoes are already here. So track spikes are a little different than marathon shoes, but over the last, let's say 5 years, track spikes have already also evolved a little bit. They seem to be, they're less effective than the marathon shoes, but it looks like a couple percent it gives you. And so the new track spikes, they have some of this, they have a curved carbon fiber plate on the bottom, and then they have a little bit of foam in the heel that effectively the foam compresses and springs back and gives you a little bit of energy back. The thing is, Faith Kipyegon is already wearing the best spikes there is. And so they, for this event, they created a new spike for her where they really, pulled out all the stops. So it's like, now we're going to make this, we're not going to have spikes that you screw into the bottom of the shoe. We're going to mold them all in one, made out of titanium, so that they're the lightest possible. So they were able to reduce the weight of the shoe by about a third. And they were able to they have airbags under the forefoot, which again are supposed to return some energy. They were able to make those 3 millimeters thicker, to get a little bit more energy return. But this is like shaving around the margins, right? Like maybe you're going to get a percent or something like that, but you're not going to get 7 seconds in a mile. So to me, if we don't know what their internal like whiteboard calculations were, but if I had to guess, it's going to be like drafting is the big thing. The shoes are going to be a fairly distant second, and everything else is icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And then the drafting, as we were talking about, it looked a little ragged, and she missed by 6 seconds. Like,
yeah.
And the thing, I guess, just to finish off, is like all of this is predicated on the idea that Faith Kipyegon is in world record shape already. Like, she has to be there. She has to be in 407 mile shape for the drafting and the shoes to matter. Now, she did go on and run 3:48 for the 1500 last week, so it looks like she was in that good shape. But it's like one of the criticisms of these events and of the way they're covered, including by people like me, is that it makes it sound like Nike's going out and running a mile. And of course, it's not Nike that's running a mile. It's Faith Kipyegon. She's getting some help, but the hardest part is getting in 407 mile shape before you can start worrying about whether you can take another couple seconds off. And so Kipyegon is amazing, and I think that's really important to say that.
No amount of vortexes on your shirt is making me run a sub 4 miler.
That's right. I can wear anything you want. Yeah.
You tell a incredible story in your book, which sort of may have launched, I think, the writing of that book and maybe the whole sort of genesis of it, where you were able to shave a staggering amount of time from your race. And I was kind of thinking, is there any tricks like that Nike could have used, like watches under reporting heart rates or times, or, I think so we'll talk a lot in this conversation, I think, about reducing the perception of effort and how that can benefit times. And I was really curious if you thought there was any kind of tricks that Nike could have played to reduce Faith's perception of the effort that she was undertaking, say in the last 3/4 of that mile race, changing the heart rate reading that she probably definitely wasn't checking her heart rate, but there's different ways. Like, could they have told her time was at 2:55 and that she was way ahead or way, but all of these little kind of tricks to change perception. What do you think about that?
So a couple things to say about that. One is, from the perspective of someone like me, you look at all this effort they went to, like, give her the sleeves with the knuckle covers and the aerodynamic thing, and they had this whole new fly web or web fly, a new bra that was like 3D printed especially for her. And when I was interviewing the Nike apparel people, I'm like, okay, but seriously, like, you must have taken this stuff into a wind tunnel. How much difference does it make? And they're all very well media trained, so they're not answering my question at all, but they're saying, what's important to us is that Faith feels fast, and we want her. And when she puts this on, she tells us how, and the same with the shoes, she tells us how great she feels, and that's important. And so, as someone who's written a book on, like, the mind's role in performance, I'm like, yeah, that makes a difference. But it's also like, yeah, but how do you quantify that? And so I think they were, to a much greater extent in Breaking 4 than in Breaking 2 back in 2017, they're explicitly thinking about getting the runner into the frame of mind where they believe they're capable of doing this. And even just before the race, Nike put out a press release of, like, here are the 10 things Nike obsessed about for Breaking 4. And they mentioned, we did some drafting, we did some shoes, but some of these points were like, build confidence, let Faith be Faith, like stuff that, make the shoes purple because that's her favorite color. And I'm like, really? That's your trick to run a sub 4 minute mile, is give her purple shoes? Like, I don't think that's going to work. So I'm torn between the skepticism, but so I think one answer to your question is that, in a sense, a lot of the stuff they did was in effect an attempt to build a giant placebo field around Faith Kipyegon to say, you are, despite what your prior experience has told you, you are going to be capable of going through 1,200 meters in 3 flat or 301 and then accelerating. And so I think there was that mental aspect. Now, could they have played tricks on her? I actually think that's like an intriguing idea, but one that that they probably couldn't have done with an athlete of that stature. If they lie to her, it's like, boom, they've burned the relationship. And this is an issue like we can get into this, but one of my favorite quotes, and I put it in Endure, was from Amby Burfoot, who was the 1968 Boston Marathon champion, and then a longtime editor of Runner's World and a real mentor of mine in journalism. And who's written a lot about science. Anyway, he once wrote, like, the best workout you could do as a runner, like the single greatest workout you can do, is 5 times a mile as hard as you can with a couple minutes rest. And then when you're done and you're lying on the grass panting after the workout's done, your coach comes over to you and says, do one more at the same pace. And you say, well, I can't. You told me to do as fast as I could, and I did. And the coach says, well, try it anyway. And you get up and you do it, and maybe you're a couple seconds slower, but basically you find out, oh wait, I can keep going. I didn't realize that. And so you get this discovery. So I love that story. The problem is you cannot, like, that's a thing you can only do very rarely before the runner starts. Every time you tell the runner to do 5 times a mile, they're like, okay, he's probably going to make me do 6, so I better hold back. And not even on a conscious level. So I love the idea of, like, putting the start line in a different place, or doing, making the wave lights. Actually, it would be simple, because these days they have pacing lights, right? And so you tell Kipyegon that the pacing lights are set to like 60.5, but they're actually set to 60.3. You give her an extra second there, in an almost imperceptible way. The problem is when she finds out afterwards, especially if she doesn't have a good race, then she feels completely betrayed, and you've destroyed the trust that you've spent all this time building with her. So it's this is something I've wrestled with a lot. It's like, how do you take advantage of this without the explicit deception?
Yes, I'm much more interested in it theoretically, more so than I ever think Nike would employ a tactic like that. Like, I have
me too, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, like I have a story when I was running. I think it was my second half marathon, and I was about 17 kilometers in, feeling okay but tired. And I remember, like, I was on pace about 5 minutes per kilometer, which is nothing impressive for a runner, but I haven't been a runner very long, so I was happy with it. And I remember looking at my watch and seeing 130 beats per minute and thinking, that's wrong. And I knew it was wrong because I've never once been at 130 beats per minute on a run ever. So I was like, okay, I'm probably at 170. My watch says I'm 130. But how would I actually be acting if my watch was right? Like, what would it actually mean for that watch to be correct? So I was like, okay, turns out I've been leaning down for a while. Let's correct my posture. Let's get my hips up. Let's get my back straight. Let's correct my posture, chest out. Let's control the breathing. And within like a minute of just like consciously correcting all of those things that I thought would be true if my watch was correct, even though I knew it wasn't, I think I was really able to trick myself. And the next 4 kilometers, which should in theory be the hardest, were the easiest. I like increased the pace into like a 4:30, and I was gliding, and I was like not even understanding where it was coming from. And this is like the mystical side of endurance, where it doesn't even make any sense, right? Like, why would that work? But it really did. Like, it improved my performance. I felt way better. I felt happier. I was smiling. Everything across the board changed in an instant.
So I've been trying to drink less alcohol. And honestly, it's had a pretty big impact on my health. I'm sleeping better, I'm exercising more, and my business is growing. The data suggests that people are drinking less alcohol than ever, which overall I think is great, but I'm still looking for a little treat at the end of the workday or a hard workout. And that's where Sentia comes in. Sentia is a 0% alcohol drink that feels like you're drinking something special without any of the downsides. It's created by neuroscientists and it's designed to give you that relaxing buzz, the same kind of feeling you get from alcohol, but without the hangover, brain fog, or impact on sleep quality. And it tastes absolutely delicious. They already have a GABA red berry, which is perfect to mix with a tonic or orange, or GABA black, which is awesome with Coke. Personally, I've been really enjoying the GABA gold with Fanta lemon on ice.
That's actually genuinely delicious. Like, I'm not even play acting there, it's actually just really, really good.
So you might be wondering, how does a drink with 0% alcohol give you that buzz? It almost sounds too good to be true. Well, this is the really cool neuroscience part. The secret is GABA, the brain's natural calming agent. And the different GABA flavors have different cognitive effects. Sentia's founder, Dr. David Nutt, has published over 500 independent research papers and written 34 books on neuropharmacology. What Dr. Nutt realized was that we can harness the same calming, relaxing effects from alcohol without any of the side effects. I genuinely think this could be the future of drinking. And they're also just releasing their first beer and stout, which as an Irishman I am dying to compare to Guinness. Sentia are offering my viewers 10% off their first purchase, and I genuinely could not recommend it more. I think even if you're looking to just substitute your one gin and tonic on a Tuesday with Sentia, the accumulative health benefits over time will actually be very noticeable. So check out Sentia, again 10% off at checkout.
It is amazing how those things happen. That sort of reminds me of one of the cliches of running advice, which is, if you're battling with someone else and you feel like you're about to get dropped, you can't. It's like, before you get dropped, if you feel like you can't do it, try accelerating. And well, that's no. The point is, I'm dying here. I can't accelerate. But you try it, and sometimes it works. And my initial, for a lot of years, I thought it was just that, okay, if you're hurting, if you're dying, probably the other person is dying too. And so maybe you can break their spirit by sort of bluffing. But I don't think it's actually that. I think actually sometimes you're in that mode of, like you said, maybe you're hunched down, you're sort of focused on your pain and your discomfort and how far it is. The act of saying, okay, I'm just going to surge for 30 seconds and see what happens, forces you to sort of straighten up. It changes. Maybe it changes how you're running, but it also changes what you're focusing on. You're no longer focusing on how slow you're going, but you're focusing on how fast you can go. And right. In a lot of cases, you discover, you can't keep up the surge indefinitely, but you just shift the narrative in your head, and all of a sudden you're able to run more smoothly and more quickly for a while. And so it's, I think people sometimes with that sort of tactic of like, okay, you're going to hurt then surge, maybe you can bring on that change of perspective. I think people often experience that change of perspective accidentally or from environmental cues, like, checking their heart rate, or seeing a split, or seeing a friend, or, recognizing a landmark. And what seemed like the physical reality of like, I can't go any faster, suddenly changes to, I feel different now. So suddenly my body has changed, and it's not, of course, it's not your body that has changed. It's only your mind.
Right. And we'll go into that. I really think it's the most interesting topic in the world. I'm fascinated with it at the moment. If you wouldn't mind saying that your story, the story that you tell at the start of Endure about how you kind of shattered your own perception on your limitations, because I think it just sets the course for the rest of the conversation really well. Sure,
yeah. So my story is the story of the 1,500 meters, which is a little bit shorter than a mile, about 17 seconds, let's say, typically shorter than a mile. And as a schoolboy runner, I wanted to break 4 minutes. It's a pretty good benchmark, at least it was back in the 90s, as of a fast schoolboy runner. And I ran 4:02 in my second season of running in high school. And so I assumed sub 4 was going to be very easy. And, as I got older and stronger and continued to train, but it wasn't. And I hit a plateau for almost 4 years where I was running 4:01 or 4:02 or 4:03 over and over again, and couldn't break 4. So by the time I was 20 years old in my third year of university, my best was still 4:01. And I had the sense that I was bumping up against what my body was capable of, because I'd been training hard for about 5 years by that point, and I just couldn't break through 4. Now, I knew I was capable of running sub 4. When you run 4:01 a bunch of times, you know that if the stars align, you're going to run 3:59. And so that was my kind of goal before I finished university. I wanted to be a sub 4-minute 1500 runner. And yeah, I guess I'll try not to tell the 2-hour version of this story. I'll accelerate a little bit. But basically, I was running a very small, meaningless meet with actually no meaningful competition, one indoor season, and I went for it, trying to run 3:59.9, and it was a 200-meter track, so I got splits every 200 meters. There'd be the timekeeper would call out how fast you'd gone. And when I came to the first lap, I was trying to run 32 seconds a lap, which is what would get me 4 minutes. And I came through in 27 seconds, which is insanely fast, like way, way faster than I would want to run. And so I was like, whoa, I guess I got a little excited, try and ease up. Came through 400 meters in 57 seconds, which is not quite as fast as 27 per 200, but it's still very, very fast. And I still felt remarkably relaxed. I came through 600 in 127. And so I had there was a real disconnect between the splits I was getting that was telling me I was running really fast. And yet my feeling was that I feel good. I just feel relaxed. I feel under control. And, I didn't know what was happening, but I actually have a, pretty vivid memory of coming through that 600 meters, that third lap, and just thinking, I don't know what the hell's going on here, but today is a good day, and I need to just put my head down and run and take advantage of this. So I actually don't remember any of the other splits. I stopped paying attention to them. I just ran as hard as I could. And I ended up running 3:52, which was, a 9-second personal best after I'd been sort of shaving off, a tenth of a second per year or whatever. So
It's
just an
unheard of, completely unheard of level.
Yeah, it's like if I was faster, like if anyone had been paying attention, I was an obscure runner in Nowheresville, but if anyone was paying attention, they'd be like, that guy's on drugs. That guy obviously just started taking steroids like, 2 months ago or something like that, because that is not a normal progression. And the punchline to the story is that I then was chatting with one of my teammates afterwards who had timed the race for me so that I could, I was a very analytical runner. So I wanted the splits for my run so I could put them in my training log. And I was like, man, I can't believe I went out in 27 seconds. That's so fast. And he's like, no, you didn't. Your first lap was 30 or 31 or whatever it was. And I was like, what? So all of my splits were off. The timekeeper was giving me the wrong splits. I don't know. He might either missed the start with his watch, or he, this was in Quebec. Maybe he was translating in his head and it took him a few seconds. Anyway, the timekeeper tricked me into thinking I was having this amazing day. And somehow, instead of screwing up my race, like, it could easily have screwed up my race by getting the wrong splits, but instead it convinced me that I was having, a wonderful day, and that therefore I should seize this day, stop thinking about the splits, stop worrying about could I run 31.99 per lap, and just run as hard as I could. And it worked. And then, the postscript to this story is that in my next attempt to run 1500, I ran 3:49, and in the one after that, I ran 3:44. And so all of a sudden, in the space of 3 races, I'd improved by 17 seconds. And 4 minutes was
the first race. They definitely thought you were on drugs after the third race.
Yeah, exactly. And who knows? Maybe I should have taken drugs, and I would have been like a 310 guy or something. But that obviously affected, that experience had a big effect on my perception of what running is all about and what endurance is all about, and the role between the body and the mind. Because believe me, I've gone through my training logs many times, and even like 20 years later, I was talking to my old high school coach, and he was like, I think, or it was after Endure came out, when I told the story, and my coach was like, surely there was a sign in your house, like, here's my training logs, take a look. And he's looking, it's like, yeah, no, it's like clearly before the breakthrough, I was I was in shape to run sub 4. I was running workouts that suggested I should be able to run, somewhere in the 350s, but nowhere in those workouts does it suggest I should be running 344. And so, it really, like, after that, I could never run a race and just sort of say, well, I guess that's as hard as I could run. There was always the question of, like, was there more in the tank that I just don't know how to access, or and if so, how do I access that? And as you said, I think that ended up being the seed that that kept me interested in a way that it wasn't just that I could walk away from running thinking that I had run as fast as I could. I had no idea what I was truly like. That if there's one lesson I took away from that experience is that just because I feel like I ran a race where I went all out, I have no idea whether those are my true limits. And figuring out what my true limits are turns out to be has turned out to be a lifelong sort of odyssey.
It's so interesting. Why do you think if your training logs really should have indicated that you had that sub 4 in you, like what do you think was that limitation for so long? Is it purely the self-belief, the many years going on and it not happening? Was it the fact that sub 4 is like such a round, big target, and if you were just trying to shave 2 seconds off, but it wasn't something like a sub 4, you were just going from 404 to 402 or some arbitrary increase, that it just wouldn't have been such a big mental block that was limiting you? Like how do you think about this now? Like what was holding you back for so long?
Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of that. There's a lot of mythology around the 4-minute mile of like humans thought it was impossible. And then Roger Bannister showed the way and then it became easy. And that's a little bit overblown, but
yeah,
for sure the 4-minute barrier probably got in my head a little bit, such that you get how you think I'm in shape to do it. I need to go through 800 meters in 2:08, and you go through 800 meters in 2:09 or something like that. And instead of it feeling easy, you think your training would prepare you, but it feels really hard. And the truth is that to run a race to your maximum, you should halfway through it, you should feel like there's no way I can finish. That's how hard it should feel. And so, but you're trying to run a certain specific time. You're not, instead of, I think it's a real challenge when instead of just going out to see how fast you can run, you're like, I want to run this certain time, because then you're going to have this template of like where you should be at halfway.
Yes.
And it's going to feel really bad. And so I have a huge respect for like, just this past weekend, Faith Kipyegon ran a world record, and Beatrice Chebet was the first woman to run sub 14 minutes for 5,000 meters. Both of them ran most of the race by themselves, just like chasing a very specific time. And so dealing with that and obviously overcoming it. So was there a mental barrier? Yes. Truthfully, I think my perspective is that it's not surprising when someone doesn't squeeze everything out of their physical capacity. To me, what's surprising, what's a miracle, is when someone does come close to it's like the default is that we all leave a ton in the tank. And maybe this is me just rationalizing why I was such a bad racer, from 15 to 20. But the default is that we're not able to squeeze everything out of ourselves. And so it takes something special, either a great talent, which some runners have, or, circumstances, or learning to do it to come closer to that. So I think all of my 402, clearly running 402 over and over again, like there was something going on. But I think, looking back, and then with the benefit of subsequent races, it's like running 344 based on that fitness was the really unusual thing. That was me running as great a race as I could ever run. And, like the circumstances of that day where I ran 344, 2 races after being a 4-minute guy, it's like I had a breakthrough, and then there was a big sort of international meet in Montreal, which is where I was going to university. And the person in charge of the entries was my university coach. And so he put me in the fast heat as a sort of hometown favor. And I didn't belong in the fast heat. I barely belonged in the second heat. I probably belonged in the third heat based on my best times. And I remember going over to the track, 5 or 6 hours before the race, just to check this is before the internet. So to check the seed times that were posted literally on the wall physically in the stadium, seeing I was in the first heat, and I was standing behind a couple random people who I didn't know, I guess other 1,500 runners, and they were looking at the seat heats, and you look at the seed times, like 3:38, 3:39, 3:39, 3:40, 3:40, 3:49. What the hell? Who's this guy Hutchinson? Why is Hutchinson in the fast heat? And I'm standing right behind them. They don't know who I am, but they're like, what the hell is this guy doing there? Because the people in the second heat all had seed times faster than 3:49. So I went into that race again. There's a mental component. I went into that race not trying to win or anything, but thinking I have to beat one person or it's going to be the great humiliation of my life. So I ran that whole race in last, just tucked in, hoping that I would be able to outkick one person in the final lap. And then I got to the final lap and I was like, oh, okay, I got to pass someone. I started sprinting and I was like, I feel good. And I sprinted the whole lap and I passed something like 8 people in the last lap. But again, it's hard to reproduce that. Like there was no pressure on me other than to beat one person. And as soon as I had run that race, all of a sudden I was a different runner. And so I was going into races, hoping not to lose instead of, feeling pressure of performance rather than just like, all I need to do is beat one person so that I've justified being in this race.
Right. I think there's I've been a tennis player my whole life and playing tennis since I was 3 and was a tennis champion in my local school, played college level. And then I've been a coach for the last 10 years. And one of the things that's so difficult in tennis, talking about kind of your perceived ability and how it changes based on who you're on the court with, is that you would play against somebody who's way better than you and you'd be hitting shots where you're like, I have no idea where that came from. I'd be hitting Roger Federer one-handed backhands down the line against a guy way better than me because he pulls it out of me, right? He drags me up to his level. And I'd be like, I have no idea where that came from. But then there's the reverse, which I was terrible at, is that you're playing against some guy that you should absolutely hockey 6-0, 6-0. And then your level is being dragged down to where they are because they can barely hit the ball. And then suddenly you can't hit the ball either. And I could never break. My problem as a junior was always the mentality. I think the mentality in tennis is absolutely crazy. I don't know how familiar you are with the sport and like the big 3 just having the most absurd win statistics ever. And it's just the mentality of those guys. They never lose over 5 sets in the Grand Slams. Roger Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray, just their mentality just doesn't even make sense. I'm watching it and it's the level of stress that would reduce someone into just a ball on the floor where you just be crying because it's so much. And it just, they can raise to the circumstance, raise to the level. What do you think that is? What is that champion mentality where some people can just raise the level like you did in your 3:44 race? Like, what is that?
Yeah. I mean, are you familiar with the book, The Inner Game of Tennis? There's a classic book from the 70s, which is, and it's basically, sports psychology only started to, sports psychology became more widely accepted only in the last, I would say, decade or two, but it basically didn't exist until the 70s. And The Inner Game of Tennis was a book in the 70s that spoke to that. It's kind of like people in other sports refer to this book as kind of the pioneering book of understanding. I can't remember. Like, so my mom played tennis, and I remember her giving me advice when I was a kid. It's like, if someone aces you, you say, wow, like, what an amazing serve. Like, that was so good. What did you do with your arm there? You're trying to get them to start thinking about the process and to to try and impress you again. And, and so there's it's especially in tennis where it's really 1-on-1 or I guess 2-on-2 in doubles, but it's like you're matching. It's not just about what you can do. You're not hitting the ball against the wall. It's your interaction with this other person and how, like you're saying, what they bring out of you and what you bring out of them, and what front you're presenting to them, what face you're showing them, and yeah, I mean, more generally in terms of like rising to the occasion and dealing with pressure, I wish I had I wish I had the answer to that, because I would say I had this sort of sinusoidal career as a runner where if I went through a bad patch to the point where people stopped expecting me to do well, I would be able to outperform my fitness, really like have surprising races. Once I had some good races, people would be like, "Oh, Hutchinson's going to win this next race," and that's when I raced my worst. And this is not unusual, right? Like it's very hard to perform as the favorite, or at least for some people, for me. And so that makes what the big 3 did, all the more remarkable. And I think there's a lot of ingredients to it, right? Like there's, in terms of how you handle stress, what your self perception is, what your self construction is, like. The short answer is I don't have a good answer to that. Like there's an alchemy. There's people who study this, but uh, as a runner, I've trained with, because I still train, I still compete just for fun, and so I've trained with a lot of people over the last 30 years, and you can talk about someone's workout to race conversion. Like some people, if they run 5 by a mile in 4:45, they're going to run 15 minutes in a 5K. Some people, they do that workout, they're going to run 16 minutes. Some people, they're going to run 14 minutes.
Right.
And it's like, but hang on, the physiology should translate. If you're all doing the same workout, there should be, that should indicate the same thing, but it's reliable. Some people are just able to raise their game when the pressure's on. For some the pressure makes some people worse than it makes other people better. And figuring out what buttons you need to press for yourself, because I think it is very individual. Because I guess what I would say is, if you show up at a race and you run something and you run basically the same performance that you could have done on a cold Tuesday in Stoke all by yourself in a workout,
right,
that's a bad sign. It means you're not getting anything from the energy of the occasion or rising to the occasion. You should be able to do things in races that you could not imagine doing in a workout.
Yeah.
But that's not easy, and there's no simple recipe for it.
That's also such a mystery, isn't it? Like when you're running a race, it feels like you're siphoning energy and motivation through osmosis through the crowd or something. It's like that's kind of where science hits a wall for me. It's like that. I don't think that's just adrenaline, right? I mean, the adrenaline's part of that equation where you're getting an adrenaline boost, but like, why, when you're running through a crowd of people and they're screaming, you just feel like, again, your posture corrects automatically, your breathing regulates, you're smiling. It's an integrated equation of lots of different things, but that it just seems so mystical to me. Like you'd be running a stretch of a marathon and be dying, and then you'll see a big crowd of people, and immediately it would just uplift all your spirits. Has there been good research on that? Like why? What is race day doing? What is the crowd doing? What is all of that building? Why is performance so much better on a race day?
Yeah, I think it's not well studied. It's multifactorial. It's complicated. So like, I remember there's a series of studies on, like, I'm going to say football. In my language, it would be soccer, but football games.
Translation.
Where they're trying to understand the nature of home field advantage, and so it's like, okay, and these studies are from 20 years ago. So I'll say it's like various teams at various times have had to play their home games in empty stadiums because their fans have, beaten the crap out of opposing fans or yelled racist things or whatever. And so then now you have home field advantage because, why do home teams do better? Is it because they don't have to fly and travel? They can sleep at home? Is it because they're familiar with the idiosyncrasies of the pitch? Or is it because they have more people screaming at them? Or like, there's all sorts of different reasons you could come up with. And my memory is that the research is like totally ambiguous. In other words, it seems to be a little bit of all of the above, depending on the context. Sometimes it's just being in the stadium helps sometimes, but you don't get all the benefit of all your fans. And so it's like, what is it about going to a race? Why is it that people sign up for marathons when, and they're not cheap these days, right? Like and the logistics are like, okay, now you're going to have to line up to take a crap before the race. And it's, maybe you're going to pee your pants and you're going to be cold. You're going to stand in the corral for all this time. Like there's a lot of reasons that one might say, hey, if you want to run a marathon, just get up on some random Sunday morning and run 42.2K measured by your GPS and see how fast you can go. But people don't do that. And there's many reasons they don't do that. But one of the reasons is that they will never run as fast in that context as they would in a race. And, I think the crowd is part of it, having people cheer for you, just also the self-created meaning. Like we create our own meaning. And if you believe that, the New York Marathon matters more than going and running around your local park, then you're, actions follow beliefs, and so your body will understand that you believe it. And so I think deep down, I guess the research that I would that it makes me think of is that there's a body of research in evolutionary anthropology. And there were some researchers at Oxford who did some really cool studies. And it's not so much about the crowd, but one of the studies they did was with the rowing team, the Oxford rowing team. Exercise dulls pain, right? So you get, whether it's endorphins or whatever's going on in your brain, it dulls pain. So you do a pain test before and after a workout. You'll be able to withstand more pain after the workout. So they did that study using it with a workout on a stationary rowing machine. Then they did the same study, same protocol, but they have all the members of the rowing team in the room together on rowing machines side by side, doing their workout together. And in that case, they get sort of twice as much of a boost in pain tolerance. There's some, yeah. I mean, look, I'm going to say like the number, the N is small in this study, and so don't take this precise number as gospel, but it was a bigger increase in pain tolerance doing the same workout, but in the presence of their teammates. And there's similar studies by the same group looking at warm-up protocols in rugby players. You do a warm-up by yourself, you do a warm-up with your teammates, you do a warm-up with your teammates in sync, like they're all doing the work, the same exercises at the same time. And there's this stepwise progression where you do better in the subsequent running test if you warmed up with your teammates, and even better if you warmed up in sync with your teammates. And they're the evolutionary anthropology literature is then tying this into like, why do people dance? Why do we have religion? Like why, like this sort of big questions about sort of the groupiness, our groupiness as a species. How do we come together? How do we signify that we're part of a whole? How does this create feelings in us? And so I think showing up and running a marathon on a Sunday morning is tapping into some of that, tapping into the feelings of being part of a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
And whatever it's doing in our brain, it is enabling us to feel that this is important, and to be willing to push harder, and maybe to feel less because we have some sort of pain dulling chemicals going on. I don't know. That's a bit of a vague way of answering the question, but
a lot of these questions don't have just direct answers to. So I'm really not expecting. I think they're just interesting questions to talk around. Like the home field advantage one, it used to be one that puzzled me. And then I went to an El Clasico, Barcelona versus Real Madrid. And there's 98,000 people is roughly the capacity of the Camp Nou. And when you have a Real Madrid fan or a Real Madrid player touch the ball and you hear 97,500 people screaming boo, and then the ball goes to a Barcelona player like Messi back in the day, and then you hear everyone go Messi. Oh, you're like, oh, it's not really a surprise. How the hell do Real Madrid not just collapse onto the ground at the pressure of the energy of this stadium? That's an extreme example with one of the biggest sporting rivalries in the world, but it was so apparent to me in that moment.
For sure. But what I will say is, as a runner, so as someone who did not run in front of 98,000 people chanting my name, there were times when I ran all comers meets where there's on a lonely weeknight with 11 people in the stands, where I still did something that I wouldn't have been able to do in a workout.
Right.
So the crowd is absolutely real, but I think there's more to it than that, and we can create meaning in our minds, even with half-hearted clapping from some, the parent of some other kid in the race or whatever. So
no, 100%. Let's go more into the neuroscience of endurance. Maybe a good place to start is, what is the idea of the central governor?
Yeah. Okay. Here we go into the controversial stuff. No, the central governor, the idea of the central governor is super easy. And this is a South African scientist named Tim Noakes back in the 90s proposed this idea. Basically what he said is, for the 20th century, physiologists have been obsessed with thinking about the body as a machine, like a car, that our limits, we should be able to calculate them by knowing, the stroke volume of the heart and the core temperature and the lactate levels or whatever. And that approach to understanding endurance fails to explain all the things we've been talking about so far today. It
Absolutely.
doesn't explain why competition matters, why you can sprint when there's 90,000 people cheering for you. So his claim was that actually the sensation of fatigue is basically a creation of the brain that has evolved to protect ourselves from overdoing it, from running to the point that we literally can't get enough oxygen to our heart anymore and we keel over and die. And so for our own goods, we have this gradually escalating sense of fatigue and ultimately a sense that we can't continue, which convinces us to slow down or stop or whatever, depending on the context, so that we don't chase the antelope until we literally keel over and then die in the sun, or so that our ancestors, however many millions of years ago, or those among our ancestors who were willing to just run to their true physical limits didn't pass on their genes because they kept keeling over and dying. Whereas those who developed this protective feeling, and the central governor theory. So, like I said, late 90s, it's gone through a lot of iterations, a lot of modifications over the years, and there's been versions where it's like, it's automatically downregulating. The brain automatically downregulates the signals from the motor cortex to the muscles, and that's so. And I think the current version would probably be more that fatigue is an emotion, and it's just it makes you want to stop. It's your perception of effort that matters. It feels hard, and that's a very changeable thing. This is where, and going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, that being tricked can change your perception of effort, but ultimately the underlying point is that your perception of effort isn't a true measure of how much energy is left in your body or how many twitches are left in your muscles. It's a measure of how close your brain thinks you are to the danger zone.
This makes complete sense to me, to the point that I understand why it might have been controversial at the time, but now it seems very cohesive with everything we're learning about how the brain is a prediction engine, and that basically we have no objective readouts of the body. Like, there's an idea, that we have an analytics dashboard of everything reading out. It's like, almost certainly not. The brain is kind of taking proxy measures for all of these different things. And even if you expand the visual into the visual perception, that it's not relaying in any way an objective reality of what is out there. It is very top down. So we have a constructed model of our visual perception of what we expect to see. And then our sensory system is really there to error correct against that. So this idea of making a integrated signal to the body of, okay, we have lots of these readouts that we have proxy measures for. They're a little bit out of baseline. Last time you stopped in this circumstance, those numbers all went back to homeostasis. So we should probably start telling you to stop. Again, last time from experience, when you were in this state and you had this relative heart rate and metabolic markers and lactation, all of the other measures that are certainly there. The way that we got those numbers back to normal is that we just stopped. So I'm going to start telling you to stop. That makes complete sense to me. I don't know, where do you think the controversy still exists within that idea? It's cohesive with what we know about neuroscience and how the brain works, at least in my view.
Yeah. So when I first encountered this idea of the central governor, which would have been maybe 2006-ish, I started to read the scientific literature. As someone who had competed as a runner, I was like, this seems obvious. Like, how could anyone imagine? Like, it's not like every time you run 1,500 meters, you run the same time. Sometimes you run 10 seconds slower. Sometimes you run 10 seconds faster. And it's not just like the heat or anything like that. It's like, it clearly is not just this sort of deterministic mechanical process. So it seemed super obvious to me. In hindsight, I think Tim Noakes is let me phrase this carefully. He's a controversial figure. I guess one way to put it is that as he presented these ideas, he didn't present them as, hey, everybody, I have an idea that can help enrich our understanding of the nuances of endurance. He was like, you're all idiots. I have a theory that replaces everything. So I think the messenger affected the message, but
Sure.
That doesn't mean that there's no genuine controversies in terms of like, there are still scientists today who would say, look, if you want me to tell you how fast you'll run a marathon, come into my lab. I'll test your VO2 max, your lactate threshold, and your running economy, and I'll tell you how fast you can run a marathon. And that's really what it amounts to. Nobody doesn't think that the mind matters. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned the sort of predictive view of the brain, and I do think, yeah, I think that's a rich way of going from what is a very hands waving, intuitive sense of like our brain protects us. Which part of the brain? How? Why? To what's actually happening. And in fact, I wish I could explain it, but I haven't read the paper yet. Just like yesterday, I noticed a new paper in the journal Sports Medicine that's presenting what it calls a new theory of fatigue as the sort of I can't remember, the conscious perception of dyshomeostasis or something, but it's presenting an explicitly predictive processing view of fatigue as exactly what you're saying, that the brain has its model of how things should be, and it's noticing if things are, if the error signals are coming up, it's like, oh no, we're predicting the core temperature should be 37.5, but it's now 38.2. There's something's going on. And so it's fatigue is the manifestation of this deviation from homeostasis. And what I like about that view, and like I said, I haven't read this paper, so I can't go into details of what it says, but it's basically consistent with taking this idea of a central governor and incorporating the sort of current thinking in neuroscience to it. But what I like about that is that it allows for the possibility of learning, right? Like you take up running for the first time and you go for a jog, and your brain has all these predictions, and it's never been this far out of whack, and you're nowhere near your physical limits, but you're just not used to being that far out of breath, or that the oxygen level is that low in your blood or whatever, and so you perceive that you're close to your limits. And as time goes on, you're able to update those predictions of like, oh no, wait, last time I was in this situation, I stopped, but then I felt fine like 5 seconds later, and I clearly wasn't about to die after all. So you become willing to tolerate greater deviations from homeostasis, and I think that's an important part of endurance training. Is that of course we get like the muscles get stronger, the heart gets stronger, the mitochondria get more plentiful, but we also are rewriting the template, the predictive template in our brains of what level of dysregulation corresponds to should be a 3-alarm fire versus just like a mild warning. We become willing to tolerate much greater predictive errors. Or they stop being errors. Like what was an error at one point becomes like, no, this is just normal. When I go for a run, this is my core temperature should be higher, and my breathing should be harder, and all these things should be happening, and this is normal and doesn't indicate imminent death.
100%. I think it's one of the scientific ideas that I've learned that has completely practical use in my daily life. So I learned about this idea originally from Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's one of the kind of leading emotion researchers at the moment, written incredible books. And before I even had heard of the central governor theory, which interestingly enough, I didn't actually learn in my neuroscience degree. I don't think they touched on the neuroscience of endurance.
It's still considered kind of a fringe idea, surprisingly.
Right. But the reason when I learned the central governor, I was like, it's actually perfectly coherent, or at least the parts of it that I read, with our current theories on emotion and what emotion is as a basically an interoceptive prediction. And there's loads of really cool studies that I read out of Harvard about basically recategorizing a feeling you have in your stomach before a speech. And if you got it, they got a bunch of speakers to recategorize like feelings of what they initially might have thought of as anxiety or fear or or general just uncertainty, to be confidence and to be, oh, this is a sign that I'm progressing, that I'm stepping into an area that is unknown, but I have the capability to step up. And they showed that they were just in that recategorization exercise, they were able to improve their performance on the speeches. And in general, improve their own mentality about the speech and how they felt afterwards and everything. And immediately I started applying that to my running, where I was saying I was uncomfortable, but I was like, this is my body just incorrectly integrating the signals. Like, I can keep going, I can keep going. And I felt that to be a very productive thing. Like, I could definitely push more with the knowledge of that science that I had, and it allowed me to keep going. Now, of course, there's some dangers to that where you could push it too far, but I feel like 99% of people are probably on the conservative end rather than the liberal end there, in terms of they're probably quitting too early rather than going to put themselves into heat exhaustion, the average person running. Again, I love when a scientific theory is both beautiful, coherent with what we know, but immediately just beneficial to apply. You can actually practice it and get some useful improvements in your life from it.
I totally agree, and I think like this idea that you're mentioning of kind of renaming the feelings is super powerful in terms of, like, I've definitely dealt with nerves a lot before races, and this idea of saying this isn't a sign that I'm panicking. This is a sign that this matters to me.
Yes.
That I'm excited about the race, that I care, and I have to. It's a cliche that you hear a lot that, if you're not nervous, it's a problem if you're not nervous because it means you don't care enough. And you can hear that cliche a lot, but when you sort of think about it in this context of like, no, it actually matters how I think about these feelings, because if I'm interpreting my feelings as I'm really nervous, I'm shaky, that's going to affect your performance compared to if you're interpreting it as it means I'm excited, it means I'm on stage and ready to rock. But yeah, and the whole predictive processing thing, I think, it's something that I really only read up on in the last few years after hearing about it peripherally for a long time. And I think we're just scratching the surface of being able to, as you say, turn it from mathematical theorizing about how the brain works to like understanding its implications for things like fatigue, where there's all these tentacles of not just the central governor theory, but competing theories or follow-up theories, because there's been a lot of various attempts to understand fatigue that slot so nicely into the predictive framework. So, for example, there's an idea that how you feel in a race is not, you can't, halfway through a race, you can't just measure your lactate levels and your heart rate and stuff, and that is going to tell you how you feel. How you feel is a function of the difference between what you're currently experiencing and what you expected to feel at this point in the race. So you have a template of like, because racing doesn't go from like, I feel really easy at 0% to I feel 50% effort at halfway through the race to I feel 100% effort at the end of the race. You're going hard the whole time, but it's not so much that you're going hard. It's just that you're trying to stick to this template of gradually rising effort. And so that's a predictive framework for you. And this is why, again, you can change your predictions. And so that's explicitly why my 1500 story of getting the wrong splits, it was messing with my it wasn't that running that given pace was any easier than it would otherwise have been. It was that it differed from my predictions of how I should feel at that point in the race based on those splits. And so changing the error signal is what spurred me onwards in the predictive framework.
Exactly. No, I love that. It's exactly what I was going to say. I had an idea that, and again, I could understand why Garmin or another wearable might not want to do this for health reasons, but imagine like once or twice per week, your Garmin would just underreport your stats, or even say you're going faster than you are. Like if it just said you're doing 440 instead of 5 minutes per kilometer or something, and you're looking at your watch and you're like, what the, I've never ran that fast before. I feel great. This is a complete error. What's going on? And then, but of course, if you know that, then you're always going to be kind of skeptical of what your watch is saying. But I'm real curious, like, is there things that we can do here where your watch would kind of purposely once per week or once per 2 weeks, and what effect that would give you if, like, just even seeing 440 on the watch, would that give you this idea in your head that, oh, I could actually be a 440 runner, or some arbitrary, whatever the number is, but 10%, 20% improvement? And how just even thinking that you're running at that level with that heart rate with your current state, how that might alter your perception going forward about the identity that you hold as a runner, or your own gauge of your proficiency and your own gauge of progress and everything, and what kind of effects that could have. Again, I don't know. The implementation is not easy here because, again, any level of lying is not good. But I'm just curious on how you can trick the brain more progress.
So I guess my thought on that is that the element of deception is useful for scientific studies and makes for good stories and proofs of principle. I don't know that we need it, because fundamentally what we're trying to do is, in the sports psychology framework, you could say, improve confidence and self-efficacy and things like that. In the predictive framework, you could say we're trying to alter our predictive template. I think there are ways of doing that don't require outright deception. So, Apple announced, I don't know, a few weeks ago that they're going to have like an artificial intelligence workout buddy that you're out for a run and it will know everything about your past year of workouts. And so you'll be out for a run and it'll say, hey, you're about to run your 1,000th kilometer of the year. That's great. Or, whoa, you've never run. This is great. You're on this run. You've never gone through this run. You've never run this far at this pace before. This is going to be, giving you feedback based on its knowledge of you. Now, I have a lot of skepticism about wearable technology and about artificial intelligence. Like, believe me when I say I'm not like a true believer. That being said, I could imagine that sort of functionality, if it's implemented thoughtfully, could find ways of not tricking you, but reinforcing the right things, helping your mind down the right path to say, I can do this. When you're giving a hint that you're capable of maintaining a faster pace, telling you, hey, you're 8 kilometers into this 10 kilometer run, you're on pace to do something good, and your training suggests that you're going to be capable of it. So give it a shot. Or ways of nudging you without, because as we were saying earlier, it's like the actual implementation of the trickery is fun, but if we can find ways of doing it,
for sure,
without that, that's where I think the implementation can be. And I think there are, I guess I would say, what is it that great athletes do successfully? What is it that great coaches have done for years? It's very hard to put your fingers on that, but I think whatever they're doing, it's finding ways of changing these sorts of predictive templates, of changing beliefs, usually without having to lie to athletes. In the physiological realm, when sports scientists study like how do you train for a marathon, usually what they're doing is trailing behind what the athletes have and coaches have been doing and trying to explain why what they're doing works. And I think the same may turn out to be true in the scientific or the psychological and neuroscientific realm. It's that it's not so much that we're going to invent a new wheel. It's more that we're going to maybe be able to understand what the masters have already been doing intuitively, such that we can then apply it to other people. The rest of us might be able to learn to apply those lessons more reliably or more effectively.
I agree. And again, kind of only theoretically bringing these things up because I think it's kind of funny to think about. I'm curious on your thoughts on wearables. You mentioned that you're a little bit skeptical of them. I would sort of agree that anecdotally, definitely the runs that I'm looking and checking my watch every time, and I'm like, God, that was 500 meters. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that felt like I felt like 20 minutes. You know what I mean? Like those things are definitely more negatively reinforcing, I would say, than positive. And when I think of a really good run, like I have a memory of like an 18-kilometer mountain run I did in the Portuguese mountainside. It was like, you know, it was almost like a psychedelic flow experience the whole way. And I definitely wasn't checking my watch every 2 seconds. I wasn't, you know, checking to make sure how much time had passed trying to get through. Like I am sort of skeptical of the overall utility of wearables as well. And I am a Garmin and Whoop double user. So like, this is me like after using them for a long time, still being like, I don't know if having the watch on and checking my heart rate or pace really helped me there overall. I was just kind of disheartened that I wasn't running as fast as I thought I was, and my heart rate's higher than I thought it was.
Yeah, look, there are 100% valuable roles for wearables, and they can do a lot of, like, let me state that explicitly. There's a lot of things that wearables can do that are useful. For example, like knowing how far or fast you're going if you're not running on a measured course, or particularly for newer, like let's say you're just getting into running or cycling or whatever the case may be, you don't necessarily have a template of how runs should feel. Like I've been running for 30 years. I know how easy my easy run should be and how hard my hard run should be and how medium my medium run should be. But no one's born knowing that. And it took a lot of years of trial and error to establish those templates. And so if a watch can tell you, hey, today if you're doing an easy run, you need to keep your heart rate below X.
For sure.
That's great. So the question is not, do they have benefits? Because of course they have benefits. The question is, do the benefits outweigh what's the hypothetical downsides? And if so, in what context, and when should we decide not to use them? And so there's a couple of, let me make two points. One is to your point about, like, you check your watch and you've gone 500 meters. It's like having too much information predisposes you to be constantly checking that information, in the same way that if I were to say, hey, you've got an Apple Watch now with cellular, you can read your emails while you run. Not many people are going to say, oh, that's a win. Now I can run while reading my emails. Like, no, that sucks. I go for running to get away from my emails. And similarly, I don't necessarily want to be told my pace every 200 meters. I just want to run, you know? And so there's a kind of just like enjoyment factor. And then there's also the more subtle argument is that to really run your best, you want to learn to feel the razor's edge. You want to be able to feel that template of, if I'm running 20 kilometers as hard as I can, then 8 kilometers in, this is how I should feel. 8 kilometers in, you're obviously capable of going faster because you're not even halfway through the race. So you could sprint. If someone pulled a gun to your head, you could sprint, but you need to be able to feel how should I feel at 8 kilometers in order to run out of energy at 20 kilometers. Right. And that's a thing that takes a long time to learn and can only be learned through experience. And so there's an argument from ecological psychology. Ecological? Yeah, I think that's the word. Hopefully I'm using the right word. There's a sort of parable of, like, if you're riding a motorcycle and you want to ride safely, you want to be able to, cornering without spinning out and stuff. What's the best way of regulating your speed? Should you be looking down at the speedometer every 10 seconds to make sure you're going the right speed? Or if you're an experienced motorcyclist, should you be sensing the optic flow of the world going by you, and you can feel intuitively, this is a little too fast, I'd better slow down, or I can push it a little harder. And the argument is that second scenario is superior to having to look down and check the speedometer and then to use the speedometer's imperfect guess as to whether, because the speedometer doesn't know whether the speed you're going is safe. It doesn't know what the road conditions are and what the traffic conditions are. And so similarly, if you're running, it seems to me that the sort of platonic ideal of how you should feel when you're running is you should be feeling this is too fast, too slow, or just the right pace based on how you're feeling, how far you have to go, what the goals for the day are. not that you should be looking at your watch to have it make this imperfect estimate based on huge population averages of whether it thinks that you might be going too fast or too slow, but it doesn't know how you're feeling on that given day. And it's anyway, so that's a long-winded way of saying I run with a Timex with no GPS on it. Not that I don't think the smartwatch and wearables have value, but for me, in my current context and my goals, given my experience, I think it subtracts more than it adds.
Right. Yeah, it's contextual. And there's definitely obviously places where I've benefited from them a lot, because the inverse scenario of looking at it and being like, God, my heart rate's too high and I haven't traveled a lot, is you can look at it and be like, wow, my heart rate's surprisingly low. And my Garmin does tell me when I've gained arbitrary fitness points, whatever that is. I have no idea what a fitness point is, but when I gain one, I certainly feel good about myself.
Yeah.
And I watch a lot of long course. Triathlon is my main sport at the moment. And like, you see people like Christian Blumenfeld, Gustav Iden, they're very glued to their watches. And it's hard to argue they haven't had success as endurance athletes.
Absolutely. You'd be hard pressed to find any top endurance athletes these days who don't have a ton of data. And so I want to be circumspect in claiming that it's not helpful. It's just more, it's contextual. And then, they have a sort of team of scientists analyzing, their data for their full-time job.
Yes.
So it, what's good for them may not be good for us, but it depends.
There's actually a super interesting story from your book, which I loved. It's exactly the kind of story that I read and it's like, that's just amazing. And I think it links into this, funnily enough. Can you tell the story of Diane van Deren, if you remember?
Yeah. So Diane van Deren was an ultra runner who only became an ultra runner. She had epilepsy, fairly severe epilepsy, and as she got older, her seizures were getting worse and worse. And eventually, she had brain surgery. I think it was in her 30s, if I remember correctly, maybe late 20s. I can't remember exactly. And that stopped the seizures, but there was some damage to surrounding areas in the brain, and she had an impaired ability to keep track of time, and so and at that point she started going for runs. It helped her. She had started going for runs because it could help control her seizures or help ward off her seizures. But after the surgery, she basically, I want to be careful not to exaggerate the story, but the way she tells it, sometimes she could be out for running for a few hours, and if someone would ask her how long you've been going, she'd be, I don't know, maybe did we just start? Like she would have no concept of how far she had come, and also was not very good at following directions or anything, so she didn't know how far she had to go either. So in a real sense, she had to run in the present moment. She could only analyze, how do I feel right now? Can I keep going at this pace? Not, can I keep going at this pace, knowing that I have another 150 miles before I'm planning to stop, which is a sort of paralyzing thing for most of us to know. Exactly. That weighs very heavily on you. And so she became, in her 30s and through into her 40s, a sort of world-class ultra runner. As long as she didn't get lost, as long as someone was guiding her, she could push herself to a degree that very few people are able to push herself. And she had this sort of, I will say, when I ran I was a 1,500 meter runner. I moved up to 5,000 meters late in my sort of track career, and I didn't do very well at it. What I found is that I would always slow down in the 4th kilometer because I just seemed like I had so far to go. And then, in the last kilometer, I'd be able to speed up again. And so I would try and convince myself, Alex, don't worry about the last kilometer. Just run as hard as you can. When you get to that 4th kilometer, just pretend it's the last one. But you can't. Like I can't. I could not eliminate the knowledge of the 5th kilometer, so I would still slow down at the 4th kilometer. And so Diane van Deren, she had, through a, not a very happy set of circumstances, but she had the ability to, or she unavoidably was able to just sort of think, how can I go right now? And the answer tended to be, can I keep going right now? Like, yeah, in any given moment, she was able to keep going, and that it added up to, enormously impressive, but also performances, but also like pushing herself hard. She would finish these races just like trashed.
So one of the many features that the central governor theory, or whatever you want to call it, is integrating seems to be the flow and passage of time. And I think that's also why when you're in a flow state, and it's when runs, again, I feel the best for me. You just have no passage of time, no idea what's past, no idea where you're going. You're just in the now, and it's just, well, it flows. Like, and performance seems to be connected so much to that experience. But I just thought it was so interesting that she lost the passage of time, yet it seemed to be performance enhancing in this one sport where your goal is where passage of time is really not a benefit. It's almost always going to be weighing on your conscience of, oh God, like really another 100 kilometers? Like, that's insane. I can't do that. I'm a human being. No human being can do that.
Yeah, I mean, any central governor that's working properly is going to say, well, man, if you're planning to go 100 more kilometers, you need to slow way down. And so turning off that central governor is useful. I mean, there's also interesting research on the passage of time and the perception of the passage of time that tends to time. I think this is like surprising to nobody. The perception of time slows down the harder you're pushing. So if you ask people to, like, tell me every time 30 seconds passes, they will think it's they will identify it will seem like time is passing really slowly to them, so they will say 30 seconds has passed long before 30 seconds has passed. And there's various theories on that. One of them is just that, like, when you're overwhelmed with sensory information about how hard you're pushing, your mind keeps track of time based on, like, how much stuff is coming into the brain, like how much input there is, and there's a lot of input when you're pushing very hard, so it feels like time's going very slowly.
Right. I relate to that some. I ran my first marathon this year, and I definitely should not have ran it because I was injured. And like 2 weeks out, I was not like I ran the half marathon 2 months prior, was very happy with my result, but then my body just was hurt by it. I was getting shin splints, ankles, knees, kind of everything, upper back, just pains. And it was stopping me running. And I'd kind of decided that I wasn't going to run. And then 2 weeks out, was like, fuck it, let's go. And then I ended up running it, and which was just stupid, but I'm a stubborn bastard. Anyway, again, I was sort of halfway through. I think I just passed the half mark, and it was feeling good. And then my left knee just turned to cheddar cheese. It turned to dog shit. Like, all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's really bad. And to the level that, again, I probably should have just called it a day there. But like, I kept going, and I was limping at this point because my left knee just had no structural integrity to it whatsoever. And then, as you know, as you start limping, more and more things kind of come out of coordination. And I think, like, I had some friends that saw me pass at like the 35 kilometer mark, and they described my running posture to like when a zombie gets shot in the knee during like in like a movie or like The Walking Dead or something, where when a zombie is kind of shot and it's kind of like that. It was terrible. And anyway, that, like, it took me like an hour 40 to get to the half mark, and then it took me 3 hours to finish, of just like actually being in like such psychological pain that I was like, this is terrible. Like, and the whole time I was like, why am I doing this? This is really hard. And when I crossed the line, I wasn't even happy. I was just like dead inside. Like, there was no even rejoice. I don't think I was capable of emotion. I was just like, you're thick-headed. Like, you should have just stopped. Why did you do that? Anyway, my point is that was the longest 3 hours of my life. It just went so slowly. And it was like, again, that's one where I think if I didn't have a watch, it would have helped, because I was looking at my watch and being like, I'm running 8 minutes per kilometer. Like, I'm barely beating, like I'm walking practically. And like, if I just didn't have it, I think that would have gone more seamlessly.
Yeah. First of all, let me just say, for anyone listening, don't do that.
It was really stupid. Not a good idea. It was really stupid. It actually hurt my body for a long time after, so it took a while to recover.
Yeah. Oh, I feel for you. That is bad. And also, that is like the longest. That is the way to make life feel long. So in a sense, you're extending your conscious life, but not a fun way of doing it.
Not extending it in a way that I'd like. Another area that I find fascinating, that I'm curious if there's been any research on. I've spoken to this person on my podcast called Dr. Russell Hurlbert. He's the inventor of the experience sampling methodology, where I actually have a beeper here. I'm actually doing a 6 week.
Oh, cool.
I'm doing a 6-week inner experience sampling to see how much I talk to myself, how much I speak, how much I think in pictures, what my sensory experience, like a whole bunch of criteria. I'm just starting that this week, so that's fun. But one thing I learned from Russell was that there are people that don't have an inner monologue. And he kind of broke the internet like 10 years ago when someone came to him and was like, I don't believe you. I inner speak all the time. And sort of he did this process with them, and 6 weeks went by. And by the end of it, the person admitted that they don't have any inner monologue at all. They just thought they thought they had words. But once he asked them what the words were, they kind of realized maybe they weren't words. Maybe they were pictures, or maybe there was something else. And I just thought they were words. But like, I'm really curious about how endurance works with people that don't have an inner monologue. Like, if people are running and they're not thinking in their head and they don't have any words or monologue in the head, how does that link in with the perception of effort? Because I know I need to rally myself up, or it goes both ways. I'm rallying myself up to improve my performance, but I'm also, again, in that marathon for the last 3 hours, it was all just negative self-talk, like, Evan, why did you do this? Why are you here? Like, have you looked at this at all? Like, the relationship between inner monologue and perception of effort?
So there's a bunch of research that tries to look at what do people think when they're running.
Right.
And, it's more or less what you'd expect. It's like, it's not very positive, especially if it's like during a marathon. There was one study that actually compared badminton players to runners, and the runners had a much tougher time. So if you ask runners, like, what are you thinking, or what were you thinking during that race? They will give you answers. And usually those answers are like, why did I do this? Or I don't think I can finish, or whatever. But that's different from the experience sampling method. And I think people can apply words to their feelings retrospectively. So actually, right. Like, if you were to ask me, I don't actually know if I have an inner monologue, because I've never gone through this exercise. I know I have thoughts and feelings, during daily life and during when I run, but I don't know if you were to ask me to put words to it, whether I'm just applying words to the sort of images or feelings or monologues, right. or not monologues, but the train of thought. And I guess I'm not entirely sure whether it matters. Like, if I'm halfway through a marathon and I'm telling myself, you shouldn't have signed up for this, this is stupid. What's the point of this sport? Or conversely, if I'm halfway through a marathon and telling myself, I chose to be here, and this is what I wanted. Now I know it's going to be difficult, but I know I'm ready for it. So those would be the classic examples of like bad and good self-talk. Is that any different from I'm halfway through the marathon and I'm just sort of picturing, having images of despair and dropping out and imagining what it would be like to quit, versus images of me gutting through and everyone cheering for me? Like, maybe the effect is the same. So I don't know. I don't know if words have unique power, and maybe the answer is they do. I like, when I say I don't know, it's I genuinely don't know. It is interesting. Like, I've seen some of this research before. There's a guy named Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan who's written a book on, I think, was it the inner voice or something? I'm blanking on the name. He wrote a book maybe 4 or 5 years ago that was really interesting. He's done a bunch of research on inner monologues and how things like distancing can, like, if you say I can do this versus you can do this, or if you're to distance yourself in time, how that changes your relationship to the thoughts that may be going through your head. But I mean, that's an interesting question of whether you have an actual monologue and whether that matters. Because I think,
I'd love to know if that. I'd love to get the top ultra endurance runners and see if there's any patterns in the prevalence of their inner monologue. Because potentially, I mean, you could set up a perfectly reasonable hypothesis that possibly not having an inner monologue is beneficial for doing things that are really hard. If most of your self-talk is going to be negative, is it beneficial to not have it at all? I don't know. I'd be completely guessing, but I'd be really curious in understanding that relationship.
Now, certainly, I think if you ask elite ultra runners, in a lot of cases, they'll have worked hard to have positive mantras to say at certain places. Now, that doesn't mean they normally have an internal monologue. So it's either that they're using that to displace what would otherwise be negative self-talk, or that they're just inserting that they're running along with blank space, just sort of in their own heads. And then they know that when they get to this aid station or that mile marker, they're going to tell themselves, all right, this is where I make my move, whatever they've chosen to say at that particular moment. So I think
Right.
Even if people don't have a natural inner monologue, you can still choose to tell yourself something.
Yeah.
It's not that you can't say words in your head. It's
Of
just that
course.
maybe you don't have a natural, stream of words echoing in your head.
For
Which
sure.
the more I think about it, I'm not sure I do have I have thoughts in my head, and sometimes I narrate them to myself. I'm running along and I'm imagining winning a race, and I can hear the announcer saying, "And here comes Hutchinson." It's unbelievable. But that's not necessarily an inner monologue. That's just an accompaniment to my daydream, which is quite different.
The other one I've joined a company studying aphantasia. Have you heard of aphantasia before?
No.
So aphantasia is the inability to visually have basically any visual images in your head, in your mind's eye.
I remember
So if
reading an article
somebody
about that.
aphantasia, that you ask them to close their eyes and imagine an apple, they simply can't do it. They can't conjure up. Let's say imagine an apple right now. Do you see an apple?
So my eyes are closed right now. I mean,
This is a live test. This would be so
yeah.
interesting.
I mean, I'm not really seeing I can sort of force myself to know what I would be seeing, but really I'm just seeing black.
That's a different thing. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. So my sister found out at the age of 31 by us going through this process that she has full-blown multimodal aphantasia. So she can't imagine taste, touch, smell, or anything in her head. So the way she describes it is it's black on black. Like I can close my eyes and I can see a red apple. I can change that apple to a green apple. Like I can take a bite out of it. I can put a blue sky behind it on green grass. I can put it on a tree. I can manipulate that image. I can definitely imagine it. I can see that image. Are we in real time now? Like seeing that Alex Hutchinson has aphantasia? Because this would be amazing if this is true.
My impression right now, I'm not seeing black on black. I see like splotches of light that move around and make shapes, but I can't make the apple appear or put a blue sky behind it or anything like that.
Fascinating. So you're probably somewhere on the hypo, because it's a spectrum of ability to visualize images, right? So you have hypophantasia, hyperphantasia. So some people can imagine absurdly complex 3D worlds and manipulate them and all of this. One question that we're not sure on is aphantasia the same thing as hypophantasia? Is it one spectrum, or is having 0% a categorically different thing to having like 1%? So interesting to figure out. Like there's a couple I don't really believe many of the tests online. I can send you one from the company that I work for, and it will give you a visual image, basically spectrum test, and you'll be able to see in different circumstances what images you're able to visualize, and will place you along the spectrum. It could be cool to find out. I think this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Live
that is interesting.
Have you ever thought about this?
There was an article maybe 2-3 years ago in the New York Times that I remember reading about this phenomenon, and I seem to remember at the time closing my eyes and thinking, maybe I'm like that. But I haven't really dug into it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I find this, I think it's so interesting that we live in such a distracted world that we don't understand something so core about ourselves as our inner experience. Like what's happening in there. And we're constantly distracted by social media and all the bullshit that isn't real and doesn't exist. We don't even truly understand what's going on inside of ourselves, right?
Definitely, yeah. There are a lot of mysteries, and I would say I'm a full critic of social media, but we've had centuries to not understand this. So we've always found ways of not thinking about it or of glossing it over.
Yes. Very cool. That was fascinating for me. What do we know, or do we know anything about the neural mechanisms of the central governor theory, or whatever you want to call it, whatever is the psychobiological model or theory of fatigue?
what do we know about what's happening in the brain?
Yeah, I would say very little. I was maybe more optimistic 7 or 8 years ago. There were studies emerging, and there was a lot of interest in the insular cortex, which is responsible for interoception and sort of
Yes.
monitoring the internal state of the body, both emotionally and physiologically. I think one thing you can say is that there isn't a central governor somewhere. There isn't like, oh, there it is. There's that little switch or whatever. It's when we talk about the central governor or whatever modern version of that you want to talk about, what we're really talking about is a suite of behaviors that arise from the way different parts of the brain communicate with each other. So the motor cortex is involved, the insular cortex is involved, the frontal cortex is involved in terms of self-regulation. And it's so it's like, what is the central governor? It's like an epiphenomenon of just how the brain works and how these sort of loops of self-regulation come together, I think. But that's which is a complicated way of saying I don't really know.
No, and that's generally when I ask on this podcast, which I feel obliged to do, having a neuroscience podcast, what is the neuromechanism? Pretty much every time it's always, we don't really know. And that's a completely fine. And I would much prefer that than an overly confident answer, which you can sometimes get as well. We maybe need to change the name from central governor to something else, right? Because it's quite misleading. It does give the impression that there is some cluster of nuclei that are making decision, where really you're right that it does seem to be like an integration from the prefrontal cortex, the insula, all these different regions. I mean, the temporal lobe is what was removed in Diane's situation, so clearly that's integrating in as well. It's sort of like how when we have a memory, that memory isn't stored in one place, it's distributed across different brain circuits in different regions, and then it comes together to form what's called an engram.
Whereas I would say if you were to look in the exercise physiology literature these days, you would not find people referring to the central governor. It's kind of passed out of circulation. I think it's still a useful sort of construct for discussing it. One of Noakes's graduate students introduced the term anticipatory regulation, which is a behavior rather than a structure, so it's probably a more appropriate, like, anticipatory regulation, meaning that you slow down not because you run out of gas, but because you're worried you might run out of gas. Yes. So it's describing the behavior as opposed to making it sound like there's a structure in there. And there are various other terms in there, but the central governor has been a useful construct, I think, but is not sort of considered a scientifically rigorous idea.
Right. But it kind of kick-started this predictive idea of that it's the mind rather than some physical constraint of the legs or the heart or the lungs, which was probably very important for kind of creating the scaffold of now other things to come in on what exact features are being integrated, how is that integration occurring, and all the rest.
I agree. I mean, and it's still I think the most sort of parsimonious way of explaining what you're talking about. It's easy to understand, as long as you don't take it literally. It's a concept, and it's a good way of explaining it. If you're talking to someone who's not familiar with literature and you're like, well, let me tell you about this complex regulation of anticipatory behavior. It's like, it's very hard to get your arms around that. So as a starting point, I think the central governor is useful. It's just that it's definitely not. No one is ever going to find it in an fMRI scan.
Yes, yeah, that's an important distinction to make. In the book, you talked about the brain training exercises that you did in preparation for your first marathon. Can you kind of talk about what that experience was like? What was the main hypothesis towards this brain training?
Yeah, so in a sense, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about learning to tolerate. I guess discomfort is one way of putting it, but learning to tolerate deviations from homeostasis or deviations from predictions from your predictions. And so, if endurance is not just about how much gas is in your tank, but it's about um, how close you're willing to, come to your limits, then in theory, one ought to be able to train the ability to. I mean, the analogy I use is, holding your finger in a candle flame, right? Like, if there's a candle there, I'm certainly scared to put my finger in the flame. But what you find is actually, or touching something hot, you can hold it. You can touch the hot stove for a sec, or the warm stove, let's say, without burning yourself, and you can gradually get over your fear and learn to hold it in the flame longer and longer, without, as long as you know where not to put it, that's going to singe your skin. And so, learning to hold your finger in the flame a little bit longer should be trainable, independent of your cardiac output and the mitochondria in your muscles. And so that's an idea that a guy named Samuel Marcora investigated about 10 years ago, with the idea that, okay, we're going to just do a bunch of standard, like, brain neuropsychological tests that test things like impulse control and reaction time. So you're sitting in front of a computer, and there's shapes flash on the screen, and you have to press a button as quickly as possible, and which button you press depends on what order the shapes come in. So you have to inhibit the like, sometimes you have to press one button if an arrow is pointing in a given direction, but not if the arrow is pointing in the other direction. So you're naturally inclined to press one, but you have to hold back. No, I have to press the other button. Do that for an hour, 5 days a week. And
no, thank you.
Yeah. So no, thank you. Exactly. But the data from small pilots, from relatively small studies, has suggested that it actually works. It will improve your time to exhaustion in an endurance test. It may improve your tactical decision making. Like, there's a guy I know who was working with, I think it was the Danish Olympic team. He had their badminton players using it. So late in the game, their decision making doesn't get worse and worse because they're better able to stay focused. There's still studies that are trickling out on this. There was one that I noticed in the last week on épée fencers, and this idea of brain training. So I tried this. I guess it was more than 10 years ago. It's like 12, 13 years ago. I wrote about this. And so I got the researcher to give me the protocols. And before running a marathon, I spent, I can't remember, 12 weeks or something doing brain training, or 6 weeks. I can't remember. And I wasn't doing a study. Like, I have no control group. So I just wanted to know what it was like. And that was a valuable experience because it was awful. It was truly awful to sit in front of a computer on a sunny day and do these mind-numbingly boring games of pressing a button when a shape appears, and to do that for an hour, and then to go out for your run. And so my conclusion is, I know I would not recommend this to anyone unless they're like, maybe if they're Olympic athletes, that's maybe worth giving a try. And maybe if you're doing it, you need to integrate it into your training, not have it on top of your other training, because it will tire you out, right? Like, it's not.
That's the point.
Yeah. So you can't. It's not just a free add-on. It's not free money that you get. Then you'll need to do less of other training. So, like, the way it's been integrated in some sports is like, you're doing a high intensity interval set, and during the recoveries, instead of just standing there, you run over to an iPad and do some brain training while your body is recovering. And then you get more of a brain training workout. So I think what I would say here in 2025 is the evidence is limited, but suggestive that it's a real effect, in some contexts at least. But whether it's worthwhile relative to the other things you could be doing with that time is still very much challenging. So to me, it's kind of like the deception stuff we were talking about earlier. It's a really cool proof of principle that, wow, you can make someone's marathon time faster by having them sit at a computer for an hour a day. But if you want to run a faster marathon, my advice would be to go run, not to sit at the computer for an hour a day.
Because the opportunity costs is also, it has to be better than just being on a stationary bike for an hour or something, right? And because that might be the alternative if you have a stationary bike at home and just doing some light spinning. It has to integrate it into a running schedule. It has to be better than that. Do you remember the effect size roughly, or percentage on any studies of what sort of size differences have been shown?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it was substantial. Like it was not like you had to squint at the data. It was like, whoa, that's a big effect.
Yeah.
But with a small group, like we're talking, I don't know, a dozen people in the study, which means there's a higher chance that it's just a random result, like a fluke. But also conversely, to get a seemingly obvious effect from a small sample size requires a large effect size. So it can cut both ways. Yeah, it's like when 10 years passes and you're still not sure it works, then you're like, I'm less optimistic than I was. But there's a couple of people are not generally studying this because it's not popular. So it's not like people have done a bunch of studies that didn't work. It's just that there's a relatively small trickle of studies testing it, and it's also not an easy thing to recruit people to do, like, because you want to have serious like the question isn't just like, does it work better than nothing for people who are doing nothing? It's like, if you're already I think the hard question is, if you're already training, like let's say you're already training for a marathon, do you get all the mental training you need just from going through the motions of running 50K a week or whatever? Maybe the potential benefits are smaller, which is true in general. Everything works less well in people who are already well trained. So to me, that I no longer, like, for a little while I would be saying, yeah, this is something you might want to try. Now I'm like, it's a cool effect. It works. It seems to work. But there's probably other things you could be doing that would benefit you more.
Right. And I think for 99% of people, the most important thing is just adherence, right? And purposely making your exercises more miserable on purpose every week, unless you're an Olympic athlete chasing a gold medal, I think it's just going to decrease adherence. Because now you don't only have to go run, you have to go stare at shapes for an hour and purposely make your brain hurt, and then you need to go run. It's just
there's a small subset of people who may not be Olympic athletes, but who love experimenting with it. So they're the first people to try out, new gear, new ideas, new tech, and that's cool. I absolutely, that's great if they're enjoying it. I guess what I want to be careful of is not to give the impression that this is something that everyone needs to be doing or something.
For sure. I guess a takeaway that the average person could take from this is that it might be useful for them to do an activity that they enjoy but generally tires out the brain every now and again, and then go for a run. Like even reading your book. Like I like to read my book, but it's tiring, right? So I might try and do a purposeful, like, read my book for 45 minutes and then straight away kind of head out the door. So like I'm a little bit more tired from it. I wouldn't expect the full effect size, but it's less miserable.
Another sort of takeaway, I think, is as a way of reframing when the situation isn't perfect. So, the example would be you're up late, whether it's for work or because your kid is sick or whatever the case may be. You're not feeling great, and now you have a long run or a workout scheduled. One response to that is to say, oh, well, this workout's going to suck, or maybe I should cancel or postpone it because it's not going to go well. The other way is to say, perfect. From a mental perspective, I'm starting at the 10-mile mark of the marathon, and I'm getting an extra, like I'm getting the physical workout in, but it's going to feel like crap. But that's because I'm stressing my, I'm getting I have the privilege of getting an extra mental training benefit from this because I had a hard day at work or because I didn't get a good night's sleep or whatever. So it's a way of then recasting when things aren't perfect as an opportunity, which also has as you say, the added benefit of maybe helping keep your adherence high, because then you're less likely to just bail on the workout.
That's a good reframing for sure. Last thing I wanted to touch on, because I'm just curious on your opinion. I think it's next year or in the future, we have the enhanced games coming up. I'm really curious in your perspective on this. Is this a good thing for sport? Will you be covering this as a journalist? Do you think records will be broken? Kind of, what do you think about this as a concept overall?
Yeah, look, I'll be honest. I think it's awful. that's my personal take. I don't think it's like, you know, if people want to do it, that people want to do it, that's fine. I guess a couple of things. So first of all, you got to ask, what is the purpose of sport? What are we trying to understand? And so I guess they would argue, we want to understand what bodies are capable of, but like we can fire people out of a cannonball. Or we can run downhill. Like the specific tasks that we set out to accomplish in Olympic sport only have meaning within the context of Olympic sport. It's not like if I want to cover 100 meters faster than 10 seconds, I can just get in a car or whatever. So it's like covering 100 meters in 10 seconds is only meaningful within those rules that we've set out. So if you then do it with different rules, then like, who cares? Now,
Right.
That may seem slightly ironic because I just covered Faith Kipyegon's 4-minute mile thing where she broke some of the rules by having male pacemakers. So it's like, what's the difference? Well, in my, maybe neo-puritanical perspective, drugs are bad. Like, and it's, I do not for a moment buy the argument that we can just accept, like, the pro athletes, they're choosing to do that and they're well compensated. And so that's them and not us. First of all, that's very gladiatorial. Like, what are you going to let them get eaten by lions next? But second of all, there is continuity between what the top pros do and what the people who want to be pros do, and what top college athletes do versus then what high school athletes do. And so if you normalize taking steroids or EPO or things that have or hormones like human growth hormone, it will absolutely have a trickle down effect. And I think it's maybe easier for people who've never competed seriously to sort of view the athletes as other of right. These are other people who are doing, but these are just humans. And like, so I did not make the Olympics. I was a serious runner, but I was not a pro runner. But I competed for Canada, for example, at the World Cross Country Championships. One year I came, I think it was like 107th or something. I don't remember exactly, at the World Cross Country Championships in Dublin. And the guy who came 106th.
Dublin.
Pardon?
In Dublin.
It was in Dublin. Yeah. And the guy who came 106th was an Irish guy. Actually, I won't name him, but he beat me narrowly. And then a year later, he got way better. And he then qualified for the 2004 Olympics. He set an Irish record. And then he got busted for EPO. He was taking drugs. So it's like, and this is so in other words, a guy who was at my level,
you ruined the story about he was a druggie. I was so proud of my fellow Irishmen.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have kept the kept the country out of it. This was a long time ago in a country far away. So, but the point is, it's like people take drugs who are not going to set world records, but they take drugs because they aspire to do that. Anyway, I'm kind of drifting off the point here. But my point is, the achievements only have meaning within the context of the rules.
Yes.
And the rules are arbitrary. They're 100% arbitrary. It's not that God said you should be able to take baking soda and Tylenol, but not, Sudafed in your cold medication. The rules are 100% arbitrary. I accept that. But the rules are the rules. If you don't accept the rules, then you're doing something completely different. And so I don't have any intrinsic interest in what one could do for this specific task if we change the rules of the task.
Right.
And then I also think it's just like, I don't want, I as someone who tried to compete at a high level and whose has kids who are athletic and may well be competitive, as they get a little older, I don't want them to face those choices of like, well, I guess it's been now sanctioned that if you want to be, or it's accepted that if you want to be great, you have to take this and that and the other. I thought about this a lot when I wrote about electric brain stimulation, which is another, sort of interesting topic on neuroscience and running.
It's on the notes. I don't think we'll get to it.
Yeah. But it's like, that's a fascinating topic. And I found the science absolutely fascinating, but I had huge misgivings about like, well, if it works is it soon then everyone's going to use it? And then if everyone uses it, like I interviewed an ethicist, and his one of the things who writes about technology in sport, and one of his points was if an intervention is effective, then it becomes tyrannical. Everyone has to use it. And so that's true of, we know that steroids and EPO and human growth hormone are effective. And so if you allow people to use it and that competition becomes the accepted form, then everyone who wants to compete will have to use it. And to me, that would be a tragedy, because you can absolutely bet that it will, like a 16-year-old kid just got busted for, I think it was testosterone or something that his dad fed to him because he wanted him to be a better runner. Like, this stuff happens, and it will happen even if we don't normalize it. But the more you normalize it, the more it will happen. And I realize I'm sounding like a 1930s prohibition, like let's ban alcohol guy. But it's just,
look, it's a completely new format, and people are completely entitled to their opinions. I agree with a lot of what you said there. I'm curious philosophically, the future of pharmaceuticals. If a pharmaceutical company comes out with a steroid and million-person clinical trial, no downsides whatsoever, there's literally no health consequences. Hypothetically, we know this to be true. And then they legalized it for all competitions. Would you have an issue then of the gradual creation of new pharmaceutical agents that are definitely improving performance if hypothetically they didn't have any health drawbacks? I know we're in hypothetical land, because usually that, but say that's totally reasonable in the future, right?
No, it's a great question, and we don't even have to make it hypothetical. We can say, what about caffeine?
True.
Like, it enhances performance. It's not a steroid, but it's like, if anything, some data seems to suggest it's good for your health. So, look, what I can tell you is this: I have no objection whatsoever, because it's within the rules. The rules say caffeine's allowed, and the rules say baking soda is allowed. I have no objections to people taking those for performance. And the vast majority of Olympic athletes take caffeine pills deliberately to enhance performance. I have competed since I was, a teenager. That's 30 years. I have never taken caffeine before a performance. I don't drink coffee or tea. I have no interest in it. I've written a lot about baking soda. I have never taken baking soda. I have no interest in doing it.
I've never heard of baking soda. Sorry to interrupt. Is baking soda performance enhancing?
It's the hottest performance enhancer of the last, let's say, 3 years for middle distance and endurance events. It's transforming like 800-mile. Baking soda is,
I missed this.
Sodium bicarbonate. It's a base. So when you do intense like exercise lasting between about 1 and 20 minutes, you increase levels of acidity in your blood. The baking soda buffers it, and it allows you to push a little harder.
Interesting. I didn't know there was good data on that. That's fascinating to me.
It's relatively, it's been around for a long time, but they finally figured out how to take it without getting explosive diarrhea, which was the big challenge for a long time.
Huge problem in endurance.
Yeah. So yeah, not a good outcome. But the point is, there are ways of enhancing performance. And if I was an Olympic, let's say I was going to the Olympics, I would probably take caffeine, and I would probably take baking soda. But even as someone who is close to that level, or somewhat close in the cosmic scheme of things, I didn't do it, and I don't do it, and it's because I think a lot about what it is I'm trying to accomplish. Like what is the victory? Like, what if I was to run a marathon this weekend, and the organizer was like, "Hey, Alex, you're a nice guy. We're going to let you start 100 meters up the road from everyone else." And I was like, "Oh, then I'm going to run like 10 seconds faster. Awesome." It's like, am I going to feel proud of running 10 seconds faster if I started 100 meters up the road? Like, what am I actually looking for? What am I trying to do?
Right.
So I don't know. This is one of those things where I am not necessarily trying to impose my views on other people, but I will say that just on a gut level, I just don't have any interest in taking a caffeine pill. It's not what it's about for me. And so your hypothetical steroid, it's like, look, I can't deny. You take away all the rational arguments against it, like, oh, there's no health problems and it's within the rules, so there's no reason not to take it. I'm still like, I still don't like it. I can't justify why, but just on a gut level, I don't like it. That's not, to me, that's not what the goal of sport is. But it's, if 10, they make the rule, it's allowed. 10 years later, I probably would have gotten over it, and I'd be like, yeah, everyone takes it. No big deal. I'll take it. Who cares?
I like the mentality. Alex, I think you're an incredible scientific communicator. As I said, I have listened to End to End Endure probably 5 times. I've got about 80% through Explorer's Gene, which we didn't even get to talk about. I'm sorry about that. We'll have to do a round 2. I just had so many fascinating things to talk about in the field of endurance and neuroscience, and it's been an absolute honor speaking to you. When's your next book? Do you have a next book in the pipeline?
I do not yet. Well, a kernel of an idea, which you might find interesting. We're just starting actually with a friend of mine. We're exploring the idea of trying to understand the conscious experience of running. I'm
very interested, Alex. I'm very interested.
Yeah, it's so my
awesome.
friend is actually an English literature prof, a digital humanities prof. So he comes at it from the kind of William James varieties of religious experience, like what do people feel when they're running? And I come at it from the neuroscience to say like, okay, well, what are the neurotransmitters that might be associated with these different experiences? It's very early going yet. I don't know if it's going to come to fruition, but that's the sort of thread we're trying to follow right now.
I'll pre-order it right now. Even if there's not a single word inked on paper, I'll pre-order it. Consciousness of running. You basically couldn't pinpoint me in terms of interest more. It's amazing. Alex, this has been so much fun. I'd absolutely love to have you back on to talk about Explorer's Gene and all the other things. It's been an amazing conversation. I couldn't be more appreciative, and just thank you so much for your work in scientific communication. You're awesome.
Well, thank you for the very kind words, the awesome conversation, and the interest. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much for watching to the end of this episode with Alex Hutchinson. If you haven't read Endure, you absolutely have to. We talked a lot about inner experience, inner monologue, and aphantasia in this episode. If these are interesting topics for you, then I think Dr. Russell Hurlbert is what you should listen to next. Remember, as always, to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And thank you for the support. I really, really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.